Hello, I'm Matt Barrie and welcome to StartCon 2016. If we get the slides up on the screens, that'd be great. There we go. 2016 started with a bang for technology. 4 of the 10 largest public companies in the world, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook, a website built by a 20-year-old Harvard student for trying to get into finals clubs, perving on women's photos, and also hopefully get laid, were the largest companies, 4 largest companies in the world by market capitalization out of the 10. At the end of 2015, they had a combined market capitalization of 1.6 trillion, which is bigger than the GDPs of Russia, Australia, South Korea, and Australia. At the end of 2015, also, the United Kingdom's largest flagship technology company, Atlassian, had just gone public on NASDAQ, with its shares surging 32% on opening, marking Mike Cannon-Brookes and Scott Farquhar into the ranks of British aristocracy. Well, at least enough money to buy titles for the House of Lords. But by January, the nosebleed valuations for unicorns had dried up as the public markets had indigestion with the valuations that Silicon Valley venture capitalists were handing out to the startups. Some technology companies do deserve high valuations, and the benchmark for valuing high technology companies usually depends on the year-on-year revenue growth. You can see here from the scatter plot of listed technology companies that usually for about a 40–50% year-on-year revenue growth, the EV to sales ratio is usually around 10 times. But around 2012, something happened that was a little bit strange. Some crafty Silicon Valley venture capitalists discovered that they could hand out higher and higher valuations to startups, no matter how good they were, if they cunningly manipulated the funding documentation so that they could still make ridiculous amounts of money, no matter what price the company actually sold for eventually. That's why in the Valley today, the average EV to sales ratio for a VC-backed unicorn is around 46 times. One of the most cunning terms they used to hand out these high valuations was a concept known as liquidation preference, which sounds complicated, but the way it works is quite simple. Simply, when the company sells, the venture capitalist gets back their money, or a multiple of their money, and then they share. So normally, if, say, a VC invested $2 million in a startup that had a $6 million pre-money valuation, that would buy you 25% of the business. But if you had something like a 2 times participating liquidation preference, what that would mean is the VC would get $4 million off the top, and then they'd share 25% of whatever's left. So it's pretty cunning because in a business that you'd normally own 25%, in that sort of exit, on a $12 million exit, you'd get 50%. So as a result, venture capitalists could pencil in higher and higher valuations in terms of the term sheets they wrote. And in fact, from 2012 to 2016, the Series A valuations for Silicon Valley, A and B, C and D, all doubled. Not because the companies were doing any better, but because the VCs actually figured out how they could fudge some complicated funding documentation that cash-hungry startups rarely read or understood. At the same time, it solved a lot of problems for these top 10 VCs, because the stratospheric valuations also allowed them to write bigger and bigger checks to the startups. And this is a great outcome because there's a thing known as an information cascade, which is once you're a top 10 venture capitalist, you tend to get all the deal flow. So the top 10 VCs get all the deal flow, which means they all get all the money as well from their limited partners. And because they get so much money from their limited partners, they have to put more and more money to work. So if you get $1 billion in your fund, you really can't run around doing spray and pray doing $5 million investments. Instead, you've got to do big investments instead of $100 million licks. Otherwise, you run out of good companies to find, and also you run out of the cognitive bandwidth for you to manage your portfolio. And not just that, but if you consider venture capital investing and how it works, it's basically portfolio investing. And so a portfolio of investments in an early stage, illiquid, high-risk technology companies, they don't really obey a normal distribution of returns. In fact, they obey a power law. And so to a first approximation, a venture capitalist portfolio will only make money if your best investment returns the entire funds under management. Ron Conway, who's a super angel in Silicon Valley, had Google in his second angel fund, and he invested in hundreds of startups in that fund in 1999. And even though he had Google in that fund, which is one of the best investments in the history of investing, you can probably not read it quite clearly on the right-hand corner here, but in a letter 6 years later, he'd only returned 52% of the money, so 52 cents in the dollar of funds invested. And that's before he liquidated the remaining zombie investments to Credit Suisse First Boston. So you can see venture capitalists need to put a huge amount of money to work once, and in the 1 or 2 home runs they may have in their portfolio if they're really, really lucky. And not just because their fund size is so big, but because most of their investments don't make bad returns, they make no returns at all. This is like the 2009 to 2010 cohort of venture-funded startups. 13 billion went into the funnel, 1,000 startups were funded, 77% of them blew up, 22% were liquidated, mostly for small amounts of money, but with the occasional win. And only 9 made it to the other side, or less than 1%. And in that cohort, we had Instagram, Uber, Slack, and so forth. So if you're lucky enough to have a winner in your portfolio, you need to invest as much money as possible into it. So in the third quarter of 2016, you can see why over a quarter of the $32 billion raised by VCs just went into 6 funds. And the top 10 deals in a given quarter can often consume 25 to 40% of all funds invested. In fact, in Q2 of 2016, 2 deals consumed 31% of all funds in the quarter invested. So this led to the rise of the unicorn, which is named for a startup which has raised money at over $1 billion valuation. And from 1999 to 2008, there was really more than sort of 2 or 3 unicorns in existence. But then, 2010 there were 11, 2011 there were 20, 28, and 49 in 2014. So the number of unicorns proliferated. In the 2015 study by Fenwick & West of US VC-backed unicorns that raised money in the 12 months to Q1 of 2015, 100% of them had a liquidation preference. And in fact, by Q2 of 2015, which was really the peak of the unicorn phenomenon, 67% of all companies that had liquidation preference had multiples of 2 times to 3 times, which is pretty aggressive. So let's say a VC invests $100 million in a $1 billion unicorn. That would normally buy you 9% if it was ordinary stock. But with a 2 times liquidation preference, if the company is sold for $200 million or less, the VCs will get everything and the employees and the founders will get 0. At the $300 million exit, they make, the VCs will take 69%, and at $400 million exit, they take 55%, which is quite a bit different from 9%, which you'd normally get in an ordinary company. And if it's a 3 times liquidation preference, you'd see a similar sort of thing, but at a $600 million exit, the VC would take 55%. So if you think that is bad enough, this is just one of a suite of terms that VCs used to pump up their returns. Another particularly nasty one was called a ratchet, which basically allows the VC shares to multiply if you, depending on a particular revenue target, if you don't hit it, the VC will get more and more shares. The valuation, or even the IPO launch date. So you can, companies like Box and Square, if they didn't IPO by a certain date, the VC got more and more shares, and every quarter it went on, they got more and more shares from that. And all of these terms allowed venture capitalists to really inflate the valuations they gave to unicorns into nosebleed territory and pass that way into injury time. By the January of 2016, there were 173 unicorns valued at $585 billion, which is a staggering amount, and it was a real problem for the venture capitalists. Fortune magazine said at the time, VCs have pumped up the value of the unicorn startups, now tech IPOs are in trouble, good luck getting out. And according to Professor Jay Ritter from the University of Florida, from 2001 to 2015, on average every year, there were about 37 technology IPOs. But by the first quarter of 2016, this had ground to a complete halt of 0. With an average valuation of 46 times revenue, the bullshit valuations that venture capitalists were handing out started to bite as unicorns were priced out of not just being able to go public, but also priced out of being trade-saled without a serious cram down in valuation. But also in January, and skipping across the Pacific closer to home, the first of, in Australia, and continuing on the theme of the funny money, the first of a series of media company investments into startups occurred where high valuations were achieved because of substantial consideration was not just paid in cash, but in advertising credit. We're still waiting to hear back from Paddy Cosgrove about our offer to buy Web Summit for $9 billion in StartCon advertising credit. And in February, in bad news for Anthony Weiner, a US federal court judge in February asked Apple to help the FBI unlock an iPhone belonging to the shooter who killed 14 people, prompting an outcry from the public. Apple CEO Tim Cook called the order chilling and said it would require writing a new software that would be a master key capable of opening hundreds of millions of locks. Cook's argument was the FBI could access the iPhone, nothing would stop them from doing to many others. And also in February, and also in Australia, REA bought the remaining shares it didn't own in Patrick O's iProperty, valuing the business at over $750 million. Patrick is the founder of Catcher Group, which is a clone of the Clone Factory Rocket Internet, and we can't wait till the rest of his portfolio exits. Not just iProperty, but iCar Asia, a clone of car sales, iFlix, a clone of Netflix, iGoogle, iApple, and iAmazon. And in March, WeWork, a co-working space just like Regis, but with ping pong tables and free beer, started the raise of a whopping $690 million of a colossal $16 billion pre-money valuation. This would make the 6-year-old startup the third most valuable publicly traded office landlord in the world, were it publicly traded. In a clear example of how the unicorns have priced themselves out of the public markets, WeWork's closest competitor is Regis, which is publicly traded, and Regis has 40 million square feet of space, or 8 times the office space of WeWork, but is valued at a measly $2 billion, making WeWork 64 times more expensive for the novel addition of a few brightly colored walls and a Pac-Man machine. And the funny thing is, WeWork actually isn't even an internet company. Speaking of Pac-Man, and one adversary you don't want to be playing Pac-Man against is Google's DeepMind, whose AlphaGo AI in March beat 18-time world champion Lee Sedol in 4 out of 5 games of Go, which is one of the world's most difficult board games in terms of complexity. The DeepMind unit now plans to focus the AI, otherwise known as Skynet, on beating the best human players at StarCraft, shortly before it takes on the best human players in global thermonuclear war. And on the back of the news and into the quarter, Alphabet, the holding company for Skynet, joined Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook to make 5 technology companies now the top 10 largest public companies by market capitalization. Combined with a market cap of $2.2 trillion, this is equivalent to the GDP of India, which is the 7th largest country in the world. And these companies also had growing influence to match. In April, SpaceX, the private rocket company operating out of a volcano on a secret island run by James Bond villain Elon Musk, successfully landed a rocket for the first time on a drone ship. Since then, 3 more successful drone ship landings have been achieved, and it's estimated by using the SpaceX reusable rocket that NASA will save 30%, which is even more money from NASA that they've saved using France.com to build parts of the International Space Station. True story, bro. Fast forward to May, and a calculated gamble, maverick billionaire Peter Thiel again defied convention by backing Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump. And in his book From Zero to One, Thiel rails against convention, encouraging entrepreneurs to seek opportunity from open but unsuspected secrets about how the world works. Thiel certainly nailed it, being the only one of only very few people from Silicon Valley to actually support the Trump candidacy, and now is a prime spot at the Trump table. Like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel was also the CEO of PayPal, is a billionaire, and spends his spare time living out the life of a Bond villain. Recently, he threw money at the Seasteading Institute, which is plans on having man-made island colonies, which are far away from governments who meddle in with people's lives. But he also donated $3.5 million to the Methuselah Institute, which is basically researchers extending the human lifespan. And like Trump, he wants to be president someday, but unfortunately can't because he was born in Germany. And the president has to be born in the United States, so maybe he can convince the Donald to change that in the next few years. And in his spare time, he also destroyed Gawker, a trashy gossip magazine, by funding a lawsuit by WWF wrestling champion Hulk Hogan, where Hulk Hogan was suing Gawker over a sex tape which leaked, where he was having sex with his best friend's wife, the best friend, of course, being by some other name of Bubba the Love Sponge. Gawker was destroyed when a judge awarded the Hulk $140 million in the deal, and no, you cannot make this up. In June, Microsoft offered to buy LinkedIn in a colossal $26 billion deal after LinkedIn's share price collapsed 60% after bad earnings results. Unlike in the fantasy land of unicorns, valuations don't always go up. So one of the dirty secrets in Silicon Valley is why company founders wanted all their startups to be unicorns. And one of the reasons is so they can provide employees what appear to be really, really generous stock compensation packages. And making an offer of stock that you can't refuse is pretty easy when you have a fantasy valuation. LinkedIn, in fact, was one of the biggest grantors of employee stock. In 2014, around 14% of revenue, or $319, was paid to employees in stock grants. And in 2015, about 17% of revenue, or $500 million, which was actually equivalent to about 96% of operating income, remarkably. So it's not good when the stock goes down. And in fact, over the last 2 years after the stock collapsed, any option that was priced at a market strike was actually wiped out. In June, and finally, the first US venture-backed technology IPO of the year happened when Twilio, a software company that helps technology companies make anonymous prank calls, went public. Its IPO went up nearly 92% in the first day of trading, bringing some hope to the market. And in July, in one of the happiest deals of the year, Dollar Shave Club sold for $1 billion to Unilever. The company has the motto, "Our razors are freaking great," which is kind of interesting. It was also followed by one of the saddest deals of the year, saddest $5 billion deals actually in the history of technology. In 1998, Yahoo refused to buy Google for $1 million. And in 2002, Yahoo realized a mistake and offered $3 billion. Google said, "No, we want $5 billion. Yahoo refuses. And then in 2008, Yahoo refused not to be sold to Microsoft for $44.6 billion, only to be sold for $4.8 billion in July. July also saw the flash in the pan launch of Pokemon Go, a corporate surveillance app for spying on the inside of buildings, masquerading as a shallow, free-to-air, location-based augmented reality game. After initially requiring full access to your Gmail account, the game directs you to video with your mobile phone, cute fantasy creatures that appear in the world that Google doesn't really have mapped out or under surveillance, while simultaneously making you look like an idiot. Developed by the creator of Google Earth and the manager of Google Maps and Street View, you can now expect an upgrade to these products, or at least the NSA version, any day now. Come August, and Uber, the philanthropic private transportation company, which pioneered there is always a greater fool theory of capital raising, having raised $12 billion to deliver 2 billion rides at an average cost of $6 per ride, finally calls it a day and sells its China operation to Didi Chuxing for quite a lot of money. Rumoured to be spending around $70 million a week prior to the sale, the combined China go-to-market strategy of Didi and Uber was one of the greatest philanthropic donations from Silicon Valley to the general public in history, with $5 to $6 billion was sprayed out. Also in August, Facebook launched Livestream, which allows users from around the world to watch free blurry videos of your friends drunkenly stubble around nightclubs every time they get sozzled. And in the first 8 months of the year, only 9 technology companies have gone public, which is the lowest number since 2008. Shortly thereafter, Samsung released the Galaxy Note 7 improvised explosive device, which soon became the #1 mobile handset for ISIS and Al-Qaeda insurgents in Syria. And in September, in a moment of courage, or ultimately sheer stupidity, Apple released the iPhone 7, which is just like the iPhone 6, but without the headphone jack. Now, an out-of-the-box MacBook and an out-of-the-box iPhone don't actually plug together unless you have an out-of-the-box dongle. In the same month in Australia, Airtree announced that it had raised a $250 million fund, making it the largest venture fund in Australian history. Managing partner Craig Blair says he plans on using the funds to make up for his long list of missed opportunities. And at the end of the third quarter, now 6 of the top 10 companies globally by market capitalization were technology companies, as the Chinese internet behemoth Tencent joined. And combined, they have a market capitalization of $2.6 trillion, which is equivalent to the GDP of the United Kingdom, which is the 5th largest country in the world. In October, in a Google Plus moment, Facebook launches Marketplace, so finally iPhones, booze, Kim Kardashian, and lamb chops are together at last. This is followed by Google in an Apple moment, releasing the Pixel phone, the first Google phone to have integrated Google Assistant, otherwise known as Skynet. Certainly nothing should go wrong when we plug in the AI behind the controlled demolition of the world's best player at the world's most complex board game into software that powers our search engine, web browser, email, DNS, phone operating system, and tracks each and every move, action, and thought on the planet. However, by far the most important feature was the fact that Google included, which included a lot of courage, the 3.5mm headphone jack, which was a big moment for Google. But it also included the USB-C port, so unlike the iPhone 7, it is actually compatible with Apple MacBooks out of the box. At the end of the month, Twitter surprised everyone that was killing Vine, which is a video sharing platform they bought in 2012, which works really, really well, provided that all your videos are 6 seconds long or less. And analysts are still waiting for when the CIA will cut funding to the Twitter program, because analysis has shown that after 800 billion tweets, not one useful bit of information was ever transmitted. In October, and the social, cultural, environmental, and political vandal and political train wreck known as Mike Baird announced the state of New South Wales was scouring the world looking for technology gazelles to come to Sydney. Mike Baird decided to completely make up the definition of a gazelle as a small to medium enterprise with a payroll of more than $750,000 and revenue that grows at least 20% per annum for the consecutive 3 years. Now, I'd never heard of the concept of payroll being used to value technology companies in Silicon Valley, so I actually did a bit of scouring of the New South Wales government website to discover that $750,000 is the threshold at which payroll tax is levied in the state. So startups from around the world come to Sydney where Casino Mike can tax you, and the train wreck continues, so keep Sydney open. In November, probably the biggest surprise of all was in a major upset, Donald Trump won, or rather Hillary Clinton lost, the US presidential election. In fact, Hillary Clinton lost so much that the proposition for marijuana won in more states than Hillary Clinton. Marijuana now in the United States is a $50 billion market, which is slowly moving from black to white, while in the White House, we're slowly moving from orange to black. Sorry, black to orange. Orange is the new black. And the bad news for the year, final news for the year, and bad news for Anthony Weiner, Snap Inc., formerly known as Snapchat, formerly known as the app that you use for sending pictures of your Anthony Weiner to people, that also handily has built in a payment system known as Snapcash in case people want to send you money back for that. What could possibly go wrong? Announced a set of glasses that now allows you to keep your hands free for more Snapcash generating activities. And in good news for Miranda Kerr, Snap also announced it was going public with a valuation of around $25 billion. $25 billion an app for sending pictures of your willy is now worth $25 billion. How is this possible? Well, I guess at least it has $25 billion worth of blackmail material. It's been a crazy year for technology, and the unicorns problem is now a $743 billion problem as 201 companies struggle to find an exit for their investors. We think this problem is only going to get worse as public markets become more volatile and nosebleed unicorn valuations continue to price themselves out of being acquired. NASDAQ continues to diverge from VC deal volume. IPO count is down by 75%, and the size of IPO rounds have halved, showing that public market exits are less and less likely. With no exit on the horizon for the bulk of their portfolio, venture capitalists are constipated and will be increasingly forced to conduct either triage in their portfolio or actively manage some of their losers. It's only a matter of time before we see a day of reckoning, and what we think is happening soon is the bonfire of the unicorns. So in 2017, you don't want to be a unicorn, you want to be a cockroach. And this is a startup that can survive in any condition, even if Google's Skynet starts thermonuclear war. This is why we've flown over a dozen of the world's top Silicon Valley's, the world's greatest growth experts from Silicon Valley to Australia to teach you how to grow your revenue. They're the best of the best, so I hope you enjoyed today's sessions. And without further ado, on with the show. Thank you.